Hey friends, welcome back to another episode of Cold-Blooded Serial. I am your host and true crime bestie, Tika. The Genesee River Killer, the Monster of the River, the Rochester Strangler. These are the names of one man who caused fear in the city residents of Rochester, New York between early 1988 and late 1989. This is the story of Arthur J. Shawcross. Arthur Shawcross was born in Kittery, Maine on June 6, 1945. And while he was a child, his family moved to Watertown, New York, which is about 2.5 hours away from Rochester. Now, friends, you know I like a good backstory, right? Like, what happened in your childhood to make you become a serial killer or the psycho that you became? Listen, I don't have a lot of information on Arthur's background. I only have what he shared with his psychologist or psychiatrist. And it's pretty disturbing. So I'm going to summarize what I read because it literally made me sick to my stomach. Like, I was so nauseous, and I can take a lot, but you know, when you hear what I say, because I can only summarize it so much, you'll understand why I feel the way I feel. So I was like, you know what? I can't keep reading this because it just was not sitting right with me. And it made me feel uncomfortable, like just really sick and disturbed. So take this with a grain of salt because his psychiatrist also says that he is a compulsive liar. And when they met with his family, the family said that he had a pretty normal childhood and that none of the things that he has shared is actually true. So Arthur just might be a complete psychopath. Some people are just born evil, right? But if any of this did happen, it doesn't excuse him for becoming a serial killer. It just kind of makes me feel bad for the person he once was before he became a serial killer. All right, so he says that when he was a child, he was sexually assaulted by both his mom and his aunt, and that both women performed fallacious acts on him. He also said that he had an incestuous relationship with his younger sister and his cousin when he was 14 years old. And while he was a teenager, he also had a homosexual relationship with a friend. And together, they met with a local farmer, and all three of these men and young men began performing bestiality acts with animals. So, yeah, like, this is some of the most disturbing things I've ever read. So I was like, I can't do this. So, let's get into it. After beginning to read his backstory, I was like, I can't read this book. I'm just going to find some newspaper articles and just go from there. So I read articles from biography.com as well as the local Rochester, New York newspaper, Democrat and Chronicle. We'll start with his first murder. On April 7th, 1972, Arthur took the life of his 10-year-old neighbor, Jack Blake. They went fishing together, and Jack was never seen again. Of course, when the authorities speak to Arthur, he denies any knowledge of Jack's disappearance. So it's more like a he say, she say. They have no proof, although the parents are like, hey, this guy, this man is the last person who was with our kid. He had to have done something. But without any proof, I guess the cops just couldn't really arrest him. So 5 months goes by. It's now September, same year, 1972, and Jack's body was finally located. Poor Jack had been sexually assaulted and suffocated. because Arthur doesn't have a record yet, they can't trace it back to him. Also, in the same month of September 1972, the body of 8-year-old Karen Ann Hill was found under a bridge. She too had been sexually assaulted and murdered. Police found mud, leaves, and other debris forced down her throat and inside her clothing. Neighbors remembered seeing Arthur Shawcross with Karen near the bridge before her disappearance. And it seemed like he had a history of minor run-ins with local children prior to this and was immediately a suspect. Arthur, who was 27 years old at the time, was arrested on October 3rd, 1972. He confessed to killing Jack Blake and Karen Ann Hill. But he was only charged with Karen's murder due to the lack of evidence connecting him to Jack Blake's death. So a confession's not enough? Like the murder scenes were very similar. The only difference is that Jack didn't have leaves and grass and mud shoved down his throat like Karen did. The confession from this psychopath should have definitely been enough for him to be convicted on both murders.
What did you do to young Karen Hill?
I ain't saying. I told you I wouldn't talk about that. I wasn't talking about anything that happened in Watertown.
Why not?
Because I make that. I'm not talking about anybody in Watertown. You can either take it or leave it.
Arthur Shawcross receives a 25-year jail sentence, but he only ends up serving 14 and a half years, I guess due to good behavior, which is a stupid thing for certain crimes. Murdering 2 children and raping them. No, you need to be locked up for the rest of your life. You should never, ever see daylight again. But what do I know, right? I'm just a true crime podcaster. What do I know? So he was released after 14 and a half years of serving time. He was released on parole in April 1987. Once he was released, the parole officials tried to give him some housing in less urban areas. They're trying to keep him away from other people. First of all, if you feel like your criminal can't be around other people, he needs to stay behind bars. Because, what the heck? Outraged residents forced him to move. And you can't blame them because who wants a friggin' pedophile murderer in your neighborhood? So, after trying 4 different towns, the parole board came up with a genius plan. They said, wait, before we move him again, we need to ensure that we avoid another public outcry. Let's seal his records so he can settle in Rochester, New York without causing a panic. After all, his name had been among the list of many parolees reviewed by the police. And, he's employed, he's adjusted, and abiding by all restrictions. Yeah. So, friends, that's what they did. They sealed his records so no one knew that a monster walked among the good citizens of Rochester, New York. Him and his new girlfriend, which was about to be his 4th wife, which I don't even understand how he's had that many. I don't even understand how he's had that many relationships or marriages. But Rose Wally becomes his 4th wife, okay? And they move to Rochester, New York. He gets settled into his new home. He's working a low-paying job. And life is getting boring. Rose is no longer keeping him entertained. So he's like, hey, I need to find me a side chick. And he does. Her name is Clara Neal. And he's also like, you know what? Clara is not a disgusting woman. She probably is to be dating him. He's not a looker. Not that looks have everything to do with it, but he just, I feel like if I saw him, I would immediately get creep vibes. So you guys, if you're not watching me on YouTube, if you're just listening, go to my YouTube page so you can look at pictures of him because he looks like a creep. So he gets a side chick, Clara Neal, and then he also is like, you know what? I also need some sex workers on the side so I could, keep it nasty and spicy. He's a friggin' creep, all right? That's not enough to keep him entertained. He's like, I am still really bored with life. And this city is just so boring. You know what Rochester needs? Rochester needs a good old-fashioned murder. And friends, that's what he does. Less than 1 year of living in Rochester, New York, he begins his murder spree. The first 2 murders happened to those beautiful children in 1972 when he was 27 years old. His third victim was Dorothy Blackburn, a 27-year-old sex worker who often worked on Lyle Avenue, which is a section of Rochester, New York that was known for sex workers. I don't know if it's still known for that today. This now takes place in 1988. So it's been over 10 years since he's murdered someone. And he's like, hey, I have all this pent up rage in me. There's a murderous rage in me that I need to get out. And he goes on a murder spree and he killed like 11 sex workers. I'm not going to go through all of their names, but if you look at my YouTube, you will see like a little tribute to them at the end. Dorothy Blackburn was reported missing by her sister on March 18, 1988. A few days later, on March 24, 1988, her body was discovered in the Genesee River, dumped there following a vicious attack. An autopsy revealed that she had suffered severe wounds from a blunt object. There were also human bite marks found all around her private area, and the cause of her death was strangulation. There were other murdered sex workers, but given the danger of the profession, nothing to make the authorities look into it or link her murder to any of the cases. However, in 1989, they discovered another sex worker's body, Anna Steffen. This was on September 9th, 1989. She died of asphyxia, and her body had been dumped in a similar manner to Blackburn's corpse. Because it's been so many months, the police have not yet realized that it might be a serial killer. Not until after they find her body. So the first body was found in March of 1988. The second body, September 1989. Now, this is where he really gets into it. A little over a month later, on October 21st, 1989, the body of a homeless woman, Dorothy Keeler, 59 years old, was discovered. And 6 days later, the body of another sex worker, Patricia Ives, was also discovered in the same area. Both had been asphyxiated. Now the press began to show an interest and begins to call Arthur the Genesee River Killer. To the authorities, it seems as if someone attempted to conceal what they did. So they were like, you know what? Either he has experience as a criminal or he has military background. This psychopath has both. He was in the military and he is a criminal. So the authorities began searching criminal records for offenders who might be living in the immediate area. But Shawcross's criminal records have been sealed. So he was shielded from police scrutiny, giving him the upper hand in the case. My thing is, Watertown and Batavia and Rochester, they're all somewhat close to each other. So I'm pretty sure that the news made its way to other towns. Why didn't the parolee, the parole officers who sealed his records, why didn't they say, you know what? I bet you that might be Arthur being psychotic again, and let's help the Rochester Police Department out and share with them what I have. That's me using some common sense. That's what I would have done. But honestly, I would have fought to keep him in prison to begin with. But that didn't happen. So the police have no idea who Arthur Shawcross is and what his background is like. So I'm gonna veer off of this just for a second, just for a moment actually, because my parents actually lived in Rochester, New York during this time, and they said that Arthur got so confident with not being caught that he would begin going to the Dunkin' Donuts on Lyle Avenue, where the police officers working this case would hang out for breakfast and talk about the case. He would dress nicely, like, clean cut. His shirt would be like nice and ironed, or, his shoes were nice and clean. And the police officers would converse with Arthur Shawcross about the case. And they would even tell him, like, hey, like, that's a decoy sex worker right there. That's a decoy John over there. Hey, we have surveillance set up over there. Once again, he still has the upper hand. And in an interview, he says how he would laugh at himself because he's like, hey, these officers don't even know that I'm the guy that they're looking for.
I'm sitting on a stoop, and I got shiny shoes on, like a cop shoes, nice dress. And this guy sits down beside me, and he starts talking about the case, pointing out all the decoys. I'm laughing at him.
Why were you laughing at it?
Well, I thought it was hilarious, He didn't know who I was, but he had to open his mouth. He thought he was talking to somebody on the team.
And he was actually talking to the killer?
Yeah.
We subsequently found out that he did hang out at a Dunkin' Donuts. And the police would be in there themselves talking about the homicide investigation and what they were doing, not giving up intimate details, but how they were focused on looking at every vehicle that went down the road and maybe writing down plate numbers and running data. He was listening to that information and even told them that, that he had told his girlfriend to be careful out there because there was a bad guy out there that was picking up women and killing them.
Could you imagine, like, what the media must have done when they found out that the serial killer was conversing with the police officers over some donuts and coffee? It's just crazy to me. All right, so back to the story. On Thanksgiving Day, the body of 26-year-old June Stott was found. She was not a sex worker. She was not a drug user. On October 23rd, her boyfriend reported her missing because she was mentally ill and would occasionally vanish without telling anyone. Friends, this next part is graphic. So if you have a weak stomach or are just really sensitive to hearing about sexual assaults or have a child around you, I would definitely fast forward this part. But I hope you don't have a kid listening to this. But, I'm not trying to tell anyone how to parent, but I'm just hoping that you don't. Okay, so when June's body was found, the police report said that she had been strangled, anally mutilated after death. Her labia was removed, and she was gutted from throat to crotch like a wild animal. Friends, right now I'm at a loss of words. My eyes have teared up.
That was a fit of anger. We spent a day down Turning Point Park, feeding the ducks and walking around, and we were making out. Then she just flipped, jumped up, says, I'm going to scream, I'm going to tell the cops. I snapped her neck. Stayed there all day until dark. Then split her open from her neck to her groin. I didn't go all the way deep into the stomach area, just split her open. I don't know why.
I have read and heard about a lot of evil people, but my goodness, this is a lot of evil for one person. Oh my God, I don't even know what to say. I just feel so sorry for the victims and their loved ones. And honestly, the people who released him after he went to prison, they should do time too, because if he would have stayed, none of this would have happened. Because honestly, when he was put in front of the parole board, it could have been denied, and he could have just ended up spending the rest of his life in prison for sexually assaulting and murdering 2 innocent children. So he's to blame, of course, because he's the one doing the acts. But the people who released him, they should have suffered some type of consequences as well. Now, with the body count mounting, the Rochester Police Department requested assistance from FBI profilers for the 11 unsolved sex worker murders. The FBI profilers developed a profile that described the killer as a white male in his 20s or 30s who was strong, probably with a previous criminal record, familiar with the area, and comfortable enough with the victims that they would enter his vehicle without question. The lack of sexual interference indicated it might be someone with sexual dysfunction. The post-mortem injury inflicted on June Stott and not on any other victim indicated that the killer was becoming more comfortable around corpses, probably returning to the crime scene again later to relive the attack. Like, what a psychopath. When a pair of discarded jeans was discovered near the Genesee River on December 31st, 1989, police began an aerial search for the surrounding area. The helicopter spotted a man standing on the bridge next to a small van. He appeared to be either masturbating or urinating. Fortunately for the authorities, Shawcross had, as speculated, returned to the scene of one of his crimes to relive the pleasure of the attack. Those FBI profilers know exactly what they're talking about. The police questioned Arthur Shawcross on the afternoon of January 3rd, but they allowed him to go home and kept him under strict watch. During the night, police had accumulated physical evidence against him. For instance, they found hand wipes similar to those at 2 murder scenes that were also used at the food services shop where he worked, preparing salads. Ew, just imagine, you're a customer of this salad shop and you find out that this dude is the one that's been fixing your salads. Oh my God, that's so gross. Police tracked the manufacturer of the wipes, learning that no other business in Rochester ordered them. Rochester Police Department investigator Lynn Johnston said they also found the wipes in Arthur Shawcross's home. The next day, they brought him in for a much more expansive interview. They shared this evidence with him along with other evidence. And on January 4th, 1990, Arthur Shawcross was arrested and he confessed to the 11 murders, 10 in Monroe County, which is Rochester, New York, and 1 in Wayne County. His formal confession was nearly 80 pages long. The RPD investigator, Lynn Johnston, remembers how they gave him photos of slain women who'd been found and some women who were still missing. He said that Arthur Shawcross just nonchalantly went through the stack, admitting to some murders and tossing other photos aside as if they were baseball cards he did not want. With each victim that he confessed to the killing, he included what the victim had done to deserve what they got. What? One victim tried to steal his wallet. Another wouldn't be quiet. Another made fun of him. And yet another had nearly bitten off his penis. You gotta take it with a grain of salt because he is most likely just lying about all of this. He puts these things in his head and he's like, you know what? This is what I believe, so this must be the truth, whether it's true or not. And he gives himself a reason to do these horrendous acts. He also blamed many of his victims for reminding him of his domineering and abusive mother. So much so that once he began to hit them, he couldn't stop. The woman found on Thanksgiving Day, June Stott, she was a friend of Arthur Shawcross's, and she had accompanied him to go fishing later at Turning Point Park. He explained to the detectives that the reason he mutilated her body after killing her was because he was doing her a kind favor. He extended his kindness to her so that way she could decompose faster. Oh, guys, maybe we're wrong about this guy. Like, he's out here murdering people but doing them favors so that way they could decompose faster. Like, Arthur, do you hear yourself? You sound like a complete lunatic. The favor would have been just letting her live. What a psycho. He also directed police to 2 bodies that had not been found, and 10 months after his confession, he was tried. Shawcross's defense team tried to build a case based on an insanity plea, citing various mitigating factors such as his upbringing, post-traumatic stress as a result of military service, a cyst on the brain, and a rare genetic defect. Listen, even if he did go away for being insane, I would hope that they would have put him in solitary confinement because he doesn't need to be around any living being. So Shawcross was declared sane and guilty of 10 instances of second-degree murder. The judge sentenced him to 25 years for each count, a total of 250 years imprisonment. A few months later, Shawcross was taken to Wayne County to be tried for Elizabeth Gibson's murder. Rather than claim insanity this time, he pleaded guilty and received a further life sentence. He was held at the Sullivan Correctional Facility in Fallsburg, New York, where he spent the rest of his life until his death due to cardiac arrest on November 10th, 2008.
People on the outside do not know what evil is.
And friends, this is where I leave you. Thank you so much for listening. Please like, share, subscribe, and follow. Stay safe, and I will talk to you soon. Bye.